Cognizant of everyone else's time, welcome to the Advisor Development Ready to Double, the final session. Our important disclosures, there's no guarantee you're going to double, but if you practice these, you are going to have an impact on your practice. That is for sure. So we have our 8 weeks, our 8 sessions totally behind us. We've got our YouTube series, so you can go back and watch any of the replays that you want. And today we are going to be covering accountability and scale. All right, so our agenda is pretty simple and straightforward. What is accountability? What is the scale? And then now what? What are the next steps? So let's dive in. So the first thing that I want to talk about is you have to know by now that a failure to plan is planning to fail. Yeah, I stole that line from some diet guru or some fitness guru, right? We've all heard that before, but it applies to everything in your life. Studying, building a business, growing your practice, right? And we've also heard those old adages too, mostly from working out in the gym, no pain, no gain, right? So all of that applies. You have to climb a ladder one rung at a time. The biggest mistake that I see advisors make is they set their eyes at the top of the ladder. They set their eyes on the goal. They underestimate every single step that it takes to get to where you want to go. And this graph and this chart right here articulates exactly what your journey is going to look like. You have some growth and some momentum and you're feeling good. And so you have the idea to initiate a new plan. You're excited and committed, then you start to implement, and all of a sudden you stagnate. And then it gets worse. There's a lull, and you start to fall, and your productivity actually takes a dip in the wrong direction. This is where most people get off the boat. They abandon ship, they abandon plan. They try something once or twice, they try it a couple times and they say, it's not working, I quit. And then they redesign everything and they start over at level one. And what happens? They start to grow a little bit and then they fall again. And that pattern of always starting over and never sticking with it results in maybe a decade of flat or maybe even a decline. And that is what we want to avoid. You have to realize you've got to ride this out. It is normal and everyone goes through it. That dip is temporary. Then you're going to have this phase where, hey, I'm adapting. I'm not falling anymore. I'm kind of stabilized. I found my footing. I'm starting to get in the groove. I tell my kids all the time, everything is hard until and they say it's easy. You have to get these little mindsets into your head. You have to talk to yourself in a positive way. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be hard. Look, we started this session 9 sessions ago with over 50 people. Now we're down to 23. Half of our audience, right? But those of you that are sticking with it and are implementing these things, those of you that are going to make it, right? We're seeing the lull. We're seeing the advisors that jumped and said, never mind, I'm happy with status quo. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's plenty of advisors that are lifestyle advisors that don't need growth. They're totally content with where they are, right? But that's not who we're talking about today. That's not who you are. You are looking to grow. How do you get to that next level? So once you have that adoption, you're like, hey, I'm in a good groove. I've got a good pace. Then you're going to hit that fifth area, and that's where you start accelerating. That's where the momentum builds. That's where that flywheel starts to really go, and you start to see the benefits. All right, so this is a busy slide, but it's really important because you've heard me say in other sessions, you can't manage what's not measured, and you can't measure what's not defined. So what this little 3 cycle is trying to show you is that you have to do this in this order. You have to start with defining, setting clear expectations. Once you have your expectations, you have to accept ownership. This is hard for a lot of independent folks because that means you're both the boss and the doer, right? So you have to accept that that is your role and where you are as an independent advisor. Those what you got to do, right? Then once you've defined those things, you've got to start measuring it. These are your metrics. What numbers are you going after? We're going to check in on your accountability. Are you doing your metrics consistently? And are you doing check-ins? Are you going back and looking at it? Are you summarizing it, right? Once you've got those measurements in, then you move to the third phase of managing it. So the feedback and communication. We're going to talk about accountability partners and coaches a little bit later and peer-to-peer networks a little bit later, but let's not underestimate the importance of your role in the way that you talk to yourself. There is a mental game that we all have in our head all day long. Thousands of conversations that happen so rapidly and quickly. You need to be very aware of the way you speak to yourself. Think about the way that you talk to yourself. If it was actually broadcast or said to somebody else, would you be embarrassed and ashamed or would you be proud? So give yourself feedback and communication. What about setting your own consequences and follow through? I'm not talking about beating yourself up if you don't hit your goal. I'm talking about, okay, I need to do something or this isn't going to happen. What are those kind of consequences? I'm not leaving my desk until I get my calls done. Right? So those types of things that you have to do. Now, what are these letters in the circle all about? I'm sure some of you are thinking about it. So I do want to talk about what all of those letters mean. And what it is all of the different possibilities of combinations of these three things. So let's start at the top at G. What does G mean? G means that you have defined everything you need to do, but you're not measuring it, you're not managing it. What is this? This is good intentions. Right? This is pretty much where everybody starts. I have good intentions, but there's no evidence, there's no follow through, there's no execution, no accountability, right? All right, so let's move down the circle to the left to the D space. What is D? D is where you're measuring things, but you don't really have anything defined or you're not managing, right? You just are measuring things. What is this? This is lots of data. But nobody knows what success looks like, and you don't really know what to do with the data, and you don't even really know what the data means, right? This is analysis by paralysis, and you just have all of these data and figures, and it's not helpful in any sense. All right, so now let's go to between that, G and D. Let's look at the S letter. What is S? S is when you've defined it and you measured it, but you're not managing it. So that means you've got a scoreboard, but there's no coach. So what? So what now what, right? You don't have that next step. So that S is not a good place to be either. All right, so let's move over a little bit down to C. What is C? C is management, but there's no definition, there's no measurement. So what is this? This is confusion, right? This is like you don't even know what you're doing. This is like the nightmare of a boss, right? Who's like, trying to manage you, but you don't even know what you're managing to, and you can't even measure what if you're doing good or bad. Like C is like your nightmare of working with somebody. Let's take it off to F, right? So let's say you've got your things defined and you're managing a little bit, but you're lacking that measure. So this is where leadership has to rely on feelings and judgment and really anecdotes instead of facts. This is where maybe I got a good feeling or I sense this is going, but you don't really know because you're not really measuring items, right? So this is where it can also lead to some inconsistencies and some things that are just not really practical. And now let's take it to B, right? So this is where you're measuring and managing, but you haven't defined anything. So this is just activity. This is activity directed, but it's unclear objectives and you're just doing busy work. You're just measuring everything and trying to manage it, but you never clearly defined everything. So you see how people can accidentally get into a mess? You have to start this process at the beginning. When you have all three, that's when you get to A. A is in the middle. That's where accountability lives. That is where you have to try to get. So defining is saying those clear expectations. People must understand exactly what's expected of them. Now, if you're a sole practitioner, just doing it yourself, this applies to even you. Write it down. Write down exactly what you think you have to do, whether it is a cold call or an email or a process or whatever it is, like put those standards in writing. And if you have a team, you need to give this to your team so that they know very crystal clear. And there's something magical about putting it on paper because when it's on paper, it just becomes more real. And then the ownership piece, accepting ownership, individuals will act differently when they really accept that ownership, right? They have responsibility for their actions, decisions, results, right? They're not just trying to shift blame. So you have to, and this is hard when you're 1099. How do you take ownership when you're already the boss? And it is not shifting blame, not making excuses, right? It is what it is. Now what? So what, right? Let's go. So when you're talking about the measurement, right, we have to think about the tracking. Progress and outcomes are monitored through this. You have to create milestones, check-ins. You have to make sure that all of that data is captured. Now, through this workbook, we've given you some key ideas on what you could include for some of your metrics, but these are going to be leading and lagging indicators. Leading indicators are things like how many calls did you make and emails and meetings and discoveries and presentation pitches and all of those kinds of things. CIO, whatever you created for your specific, those are your leading indicators. And then your lagging is what's your results, right? Like how many new clients, how many new accounts, how much new assets or revenue or whatever that output is that you're looking for. Those are all the things that you're measuring. And then when we take it into manage, this is that feedback and communication, and it has to be ongoing. It has to be honest. It has to be helpful. And if you're speaking to yourself in a negative way, that's not helpful. This is another big area that I see advisors where they're really hard on themselves, and that's what leads them to giving up. We have such a high burnout and fail rate in this industry, and it is hard. It is tough to make it in sales in general, and then financial services on top of it is really tough. So understanding and having that feedback is really important. When we're talking about consequences and follow through, positive results and rewards usually tend to work pretty well for people. Even yourself, like, hey, if I hit all of my calls, then, I'm gonna half a day or go to the park or I'm gonna do an extra whatever it might be. Like, give yourself little rewards and breaks and build that in. And it gives you breaks and it gives you, like, you don't have to feel guilty about taking time off. Hey, I checked everything off. I got through everything early. Now I get this special reward, whatever that might look like, right? So you have to really manage yourself in that sense. But especially if you have other folks working on you, that's as well important as well. So keep that in mind. This is so important. You've got to define, then measure, then manage. Missing any of them leads to a pretty negative outcome. All right, so that is the recipe for accountability. So now let's talk about all of the different ways that you could potentially have some accountability. So most successful advisors will usually start with the idea of an accountability partner before engaging with a coach, and then ultimately end up being in a situation where they have a peer advisory group. So at different stages of your growth, you'll probably need all three of these. The peers can help keep you honest. Coaches will really help you challenge yourself and grow past beyond your limits. And then the mastermind or peer group will give you that access to new ideas or benchmarking or keep you moving forward as you go. So when you use an accountability partner, you want to think the best times are when the goals are easy, they're straightforward, right? So this is your prospecting activity. This personally could be exercise and health goals, right? Those are good accountability type things. You might have weekly business development targets, or hey, you want to focus on your time blocking and you're just saying, hey, did you hit your time block targets for the day? Yes or no? Or why aren't you prioritizing it? It's almost like a friendly reminder. If you don't have an actual accountability partner, there are some apps out there that can help support you in those ways. Setting up reminders can also help in those kinds of ways, but there is some power in people. So if you don't have an accountability partner, you really should think about trying to find one it's low cost. It's pretty much free in most cases, unless you have to buy an app or something of that sense. But it's also important to use an accountability partner when you already know what to do. If you don't know what to do, the accountability partner is not really going to help you, right? So the idea here is that you don't have a strategy issue. You have a consistency issue. You know what to do. I know I need to eat healthy and I know I need to go for walks and exercise. I just need someone checking in to make sure that I'm doing it. I know I need to prospect and I need to pick up the phone and I make some calls. I know I need to send my follow-up emails. I know I need to update my pipeline with my notes. I just need someone to give me a friendly little reminder. Hey, nudge, nudge. Did you get this done? That's an accountability partner. So it's very easy to get started in that, asking people, having a peer, doing a weekly check-in, give and take. Find somebody that you can be theirs and theirs yours, right? And just make it a 10-minute weekly check-in. So it's about that mutual growth as well, right? So if you can create the two-way learning, it's very powerful. So how do you pick a good accountability partner? You want to make sure that you're picking someone who's reliable, someone who will follow through. They have similar ambitions and standards. You want somebody that's kind of on equal footing, or a little bit stronger than you in some areas, or maybe you're a little bit stronger in other, but relatively similar. You want someone who's going to call you out if you make an excuse. So they've got to have a little bit of like, hey, I'm not afraid to, tell you what I really think. You also don't want someone who's directly competing with you, right? Because you don't want any kind of conflicts of interest. And definitely look for those complementary strengths. So you don't necessarily just want to choose someone because they're your friend. That's probably one of the biggest mistakes, is that people ask a friend to be their accountability partner. This doesn't always work because sometimes they might not want to tell you the truth. They don't want to risk the friendship, or they just kind of agree to agree. All right. So those are some things that you want to keep in mind. So now let's talk about that middle section, the coach. When do you hire a coach? This is when you need expertise, not just encouragement. There's a difference here, right? So you're trying to really grow your business. You're trying to improve your leadership. You're trying to recruit new. You're trying to scale operations. You need framework, best practices, somebody who's been there, done that before you. Maybe you've been stuck for 6 months. You kind of know what to do, but you're not doing it. And accountability might help, but you genuinely maybe aren't sure you're on the best path, right? Those are kind of some of the thoughts that would go into knowing that a coach is going to be worth the investment. If the stakes are really high, right? If you are building your succession plan, if you're growing from 100 million to 500 million, right? If you're really doing something big, it'd be like, yeah, let me hire a coach because I need to tap into some significant knowledge that's higher than where I am, right? An accountability peer partner, we're kind of equivalent. A coach should be somebody much higher than where you are. You need objective feedback, right? You need the hard, cold, honest truth. Now, let me tell you something else about coaches. There's two types of coaches out there. You got the coach that's more of a counselor. It come from more of a therapy background where you have to figure everything out on your own. And they kind of ask you some prodding questions and you're figuring it out. And then you have the coach that's like your athletic coach that is like, nope, these are the drills you have to do. I'm calling the plays because I can see things from the big picture, right? So which kind of coach do you need? It depends where you are in your business and in your practice and what you're trying to achieve. There is a place for both types. How do you pick the right coach, right? So to me, you should be looking for somebody who has already achieved or has coached others through what you're trying to accomplish. They should be asking you great questions, not just giving any advice. They should be challenging you. And then you want to make sure that you're slightly uncomfortable. If you're not slightly uncomfortable, then they're not challenging you and pushing you out of your comfort zone a little bit. A couple of red flags are nobody should ever guarantee outcomes, right? Because there is just a lot of unknowns and it really comes down to you. You have to do the work. It's your business. I don't care if you hire the best coach on the market and you drop all of the money. These outcomes are tied to your actual execution. So nobody can guarantee what's going to happen in your business, only your effort that you put in. If your coach spends all of the time talking and you never speak, that's kind of a red flag. And if they have no clear methodology, that's a red flag. So you definitely want to spend some time if you're going to be hiring a coach. So that's really important. There are several coaches in our industry that focus on financial advisors and insurance agents and financial services in general. There's four that I've met recently through different conferences. So if you're interested in a couple of those names, ping me afterwards, but you can look them up online. A lot of them are guest speakers at different industry conferences, right? They're looking for advisors to bring into their portfolio and to help and move forward. Now let's talk about the advisory group. So the importance about the advisory group is that this is where a lot of your new ideas can come from. It's really low cost and it's low frequency. Some advisory groups will meet monthly, some quarterly, some do like an annual retreat where they get together. Many of you are already part of advisory groups. I know this because you tell me about it, and that's fantastic. And this is just where you can continue to share ideas with other peers, keep up with what's happening trend wise. And it's a really powerful practice that I encourage everybody to get into doing. All right, so let's talk a little bit now about scale, and what that means and how you scale. So you have to get to a point in your career where you can delegate. And so what I've got on the next two slides are 8 of the most common areas that advisors delegate tasks out to, right? So within marketing, these activities generate visibility for you. They generate engagement with leads in that lead flow area. So there's tons of different tasks, right? I have a little sample of 4 specific tasks for all 8 of these categories that I'll kind of tack through. I'm not going to read them all to you. You can get the slides afterwards, but just be thinking about these categories. And everybody's practice is a little different. Client services, right? Tasks that enhance the client experience, but don't really require the advisor experience. This could be birthday cards or other things, right? Like, how are you servicing? What's your wow? What's your surprise and delight? Administrative tasks, organization, scheduling type things, keeping the business running smoothly. Operational behind the scenes processing, improving efficiency, scalability, consistency, right? A good rule of thumb is that if a task is repeatable, process driven, then it doesn't really require the advisor's unique expertise and relationship management skills. Delegate. So that is where you should kind of keep your focus. So those are a couple of the areas. And then the other 4 areas here would be planners, investments, development officers, that's business development, that's bringing in new assets, right? Then junior advisor. So you as the advisor should be focused on the highest value activities for the business. Everything else can be delegated when it's lower level. So there's another problem in our industry where advisors just want to maintain all the control because that's where they feel that power is. This is very common. Like everybody feels this way, right? It's like the more I can control, the more I'm in power. When actually the opposite is true. The more that you let out, the more that you can give away, then the higher you're going to be able to rise. You'll be able to spend more time on deepening your client relationships. What happens when you have a deeper relationship? Referrals expand, opportunity expands, right? You're winning new business, you're recruiting and developing talent, you're preparing the next gen for when you're ready to transition and move out. It allows you to free up time for you to do strategic planning and really think about where your future is going to go. There's a lot of good things that come out of it. But if you really wanted to double your business, right? Think about how busy you are right now. Could you just double everything that you have going on? It would be impossible. You've got to get to a point where you can scale, and that happens through delegation. So those are some of the ideas for you. And then we're just going to take it to our workbook exercises. So on page 23, we're going to talk through that scorecard, right? This is our accountability. Have you been filling out your scorecards every single week for the last 3 months? This is it. We have been coming together for 3 months, the whole quarter. Have you been consistent on that? Right? Have you been reviewing these weekly? Have you noticed trends? When you look at it weekly and you miss a week, do you get back on track? Do you see that your numbers are slowly ticking up, or are they kind of oscillating? Or if they fall off, you pick back up on the bandwagon? If you haven't been doing it, let's get back on it. How many outbound touches are you making? CIO meetings, discovery meetings, proposals. Let me tell you about an advisor that I worked with at Merrill not that long ago, right before coming here, who didn't have any of these scorecards. We implemented a scorecard and he doubled in less than a year, and he was already in a corner office, right? I'm talking that this is game changer type of stuff. What you focus on, you get more of. When you start putting up zeros on your scorecard, you're not going to feel good. And so then you're going to prioritize making that outbound call because you want to put a number down. And when you start looking at it every week, you're going to have a little competition with yourself. And if you can focus on activity, you are going to get some wins. What about your lagging measures, right? Are you tracking your pipeline? Pipeline tracking is so important. We can get lost and caught up in the close, right? But if you're not watching your pipeline, like how many leads do I have? How many discoveries do I have? How many strategies am I having? If your pipeline is dry, you're gonna end, right? We've talked about all of these things, right? Everything is coming together here at the end, but you've got to be watching your scorecard. Now, what other metrics could you be recording, right? This is your practice. So design it your way and create it the way that you want it. But you've got to have some kind of scorecard and be consistent with it. So that's on page 23 of your workbook. Also on page 23, we've got our next exercises. This is your weekly review agenda. So how many wins? What was your scorecard results? What is your pipeline next steps? What's your focus for next week, right? Like this is like your little to-do list, right? So kind of grade yourself. How did we do? So you've got to run these. And what your assignment here is to run one of these meetings with an accountability partner and report on your scorecard consistently. This would be a perfect exercise for you to have an accountability partner. Find somebody on this call. There's 29 of us on the call right now. So look at the participants and grab a name. Every single person on here needs to have an accountability partner. So if you don't already, shoot out an email and say, hey, let's do it. Let's touch base once a week and let's do a Zoom and I'll show you my scorecard. You show me yours. When you have that accountability, it will change your behavior and your actions. It's really, really important. Okay, on page 24, this is your delegation map. Now, we're not all in the same position. We're not all in a position where we're ready to start delegating. But that doesn't mean that you can't think big, dream big, and plan big. You can know exactly what task you will delegate before you get there. This was powerful for me because I am really bad at paperwork and administration. You can just ask the Sequent team and they will tell you that this is true. So when I started as an advisor and I didn't have any assistance and I had to do everything from start to finish, I knew as soon as I got to a certain part, paperwork was off my plate. I couldn't wait for the day for paperwork to be off my plate. So if you're in a position to delegate, great. But if you're not, you could start thinking ahead so that when the time comes, you're well prepared. So what are those tasks that you're going to delegate off, right? And who could do them? And then the next part of this exercise is your growth team plan. So when you're ready to hire, where is that going to be? Is it going to be part-time in several areas? Is it going to be full-time in one area? What is all of that going to look like? I see Jim just popped his email in the chat. That's a great idea. Anybody that wants accountability partner, I'm thinking that's what you meant, pop in the chat and then you guys can connect and go from there. Love that. Thank you, Jim. All right, on the next page, we have, well, it's actually page 24 and 25. So the next two pages, the last part of this is your enterprise value roadmap. So where can you spend money to make your business more valuable? Do you have documented systems? Is your client service model written down? Right? Do you have a predictable lead flow? Are you doing a consistent strategy? Is that documented? Is that a process that you're consistently running? How can you lower dependency on yourself and push it out, right? What does strong retention referrals look like, and do you have that, right? So which of these things could you implement that would make you more valuable? And that's one of the ideas that if you're early in your career, you might not be thinking so much about your enterprise value, but as 1099 independent owners, most of you on this call that are that way, you should be thinking about the end goal, right? You're building a business and a practice. So what? How can you make it more attractive and more valuable, right? These are some of those type of things. So thinking about what are your top 3 priorities. All right, and on page 25, this is it. This is your graduation commitments. So you need to commit to something. So in the next 90 days, what are you going to do? Write it down. 1, 2, 3. You have your accountability partner. And then I want you to write yourself a letter, speaking words of encouragement to yourself. Because times get hard and we fall off the bandwagon and we mess up and we stumble because we're human, and that is okay. So, how are you going to kind of re-energize yourself and how are you going to pick yourself back up? And so, if you have some of those personal mantras that you can say, write some of them down. If you don't have any, I've said tons of them throughout this course. And if you didn't like any of them, then go online and look. There are posters, there are pictures, there are memes, there are tags. So borrow from somebody else if you want. Find someone that can be your encourager. And then can you encourage anybody else? Right? So that is your graduation commitment and ask to write yourself a letter. And that's hats off to all of you for participating for 9 weeks over the last 3 months. This QR code is our YouTube channel, so you can scan it, follow us, and so excited for all of that. And then a little sneak peek preview for July. We're going to go back. So, 6 advisor developments ago, we did from lead to client, the whole life cycle, and we're going to do it again because it's that important. So, watch for more information coming. We're going to wait until after the holiday, so it'll probably start like July 21st. So, watch for that if you want to join us live. And that is all that we have for today's session. Thanks for joining
Thank
us the
you.
whole quarter.